Good morning. Oh, bravo, that was great. When this project that I'm going to describe, investigating the future of market capitalism, began 2 years ago, it seemed to be perverse, to be looking ahead and asking what could go wrong. What could injure or kill the golden goose? After all, the last 100 years, we have seen unprecedented economic growth and the spread of wealth across society. Many think because of the workings of the market capitalist system. When Warren McFarland and I entered Harvard College in 1955, India was synonymous with famine, and China was our mortal enemy. Now we study their economic progress. Today, the concern might be different. Why look out 25 years when the crisis is here today? The answer is, we think that there are many challenges going ahead that we still face, that will still face us after the current problems are resolved. So the question is only slightly different. What else could kill or injure the golden goose? The presentation you are about to see is the result of asking that question first of a team here at Harvard Business School, then of business leaders around the world, and then of the faculty at large. We showed them key data from a World Bank scenario of global development out to 2030 and discussed it with them. I'll share with you what we learned. But before that, thanks to Professors Dutch Leonard, David Moss, Lynn Payne, who did this with me, Sonia Ellingson-Hout, who produced the videos you will see and did the interviews, and untold staff, especially Marius Young, for their work in making this project happen. Okay, thinking about the challenges facing business leaders over the next several decades, we wanted to know what problems they thought could threaten the economic progress that we all anticipate will be generated by the workings of our global system of market capitalism. You will hear that they all expect the stunning creation of economic wealth to continue, but they are worried about the potential political consequences of how that wealth is distributed, the environmental deterioration that has been associated with economic progress, as mentioned by John Doerr yesterday, and the inability of national governments and international institutions to deal sensibly with those problems. But let's hear what the leaders of business have to say while looking at some of the data.
I think Harvard Business School, being the beacon of capitalism, or the beacon of free enterprise, really needs to look forward to the next 100 years and talk about its role in our society, in our communities all across America and the world, and its value to the world community. Again, because we are now part of a globalized world economy, a world society as well. There are many detractors to the free enterprise system who believe that captains of industry are selfish and that they only hew to the interest of shareholders. And I think one of the things that we need to discuss more is what is the role of a future leader of the world, a future economic leader, an industrial leader.
In that spirit, our faculty team met with business leaders in Europe, Asia, Latin America, and the United States to discuss global economic prospects, in particular to identify problems that had the potential to undermine what otherwise looked like a very promising future.
You can talk to any of the multinational CEOs today, and I would suspect that they would say, I know what to do. And as a corporate head, I redeploy my assets and I redeploy how I operate or how I incent my company to operate based on the current rules. And I know where to go and how to do it, and the fact that it increasingly disadvantages the United States is not something I'm very comfortable about as a citizen, but that's not my job. I think that it beholds all of the current CEOs, as it did those of us who were active many years ago, to understand that we have a stake in stability also, and we're going to have to learn how to make our contribution to the worldwide stability.
So let's look at the big picture as developed by a World Bank team. Obviously, the near-term projections that you see will turn out to be lower, but the broad picture could remain the same. Between 1975 and 2002, two-thirds of the territories in the world experienced increased wealth. The biggest absolute wealth increase was in China. East Asia experienced the largest proportional increases in wealth, averaging GDP growth of 8% a year. Territories with the smallest GDPs have at best experienced only a very small proportion of worldwide increases in wealth. The territories with the largest increases in GDP, when taking local prices into account, were China, that's the big bar in the middle, the United States, Japan, India, and Germany. And there's good news looking ahead. More growth is possible even in low and middle income countries. And the model shows the share of developing countries in the coming years rising from 23% to 31% of the world. And as a consequence, the gap in average income will somewhat be reduced. Average incomes in low and middle income countries are modeled to increase from 16% of the high income to 23%, 1/6 to 1/4. So, an important implication of the World Bank scenario is that globalization can be pro-poor. The lower income portions of the population benefit more from trade liberalization, and the consequence is a real increase in the global middle class. Population in low and middle income countries with annual per capita income between $4,000 and $17,000 are expected to rise from 400 million to 1.2 billion. The problem is that averages mask very different possibilities. So, as in the past, sub-Saharan Africa, if you look on the far right, looks unlikely to keep up with the growth elsewhere. Moreover, world population growth will be concentrated in developing countries, and the world's poor may well be concentrated in Africa. That's the yellow bar.
There are a lot of issues. First one is the increase of inequality within countries and between different countries. One could say that between different countries, really the only countries which do not benefit from globalization and the free market economy are the ones where the political system, governance system, social system just cannot adjust to the open free market economy.
Herein lies a major challenge because, as Harvard and others have pointed out to us correctly, the world has become very much more prosperous as a result of market capitalism. The rich have become richer. The poor, in most cases, have also become richer. But the gap between the rich and the poor have also gone wider. As the poor has grown richer, now everyone can see how each other lives, and there's this growing sense of being left out, even as people are getting better off. And I think this poses enormous challenges for business and for market capitalism, because you cannot achieve a sense of legitimacy. You cannot have moral credibility if large numbers of people believe that the system doesn't work for them, is unjust to them.
The numbers bear out Timothy Yong's concerns. And the problem is not just in China. In the high-income countries where we live, the gap between rich and poor has increased. In some places, like the United States, the poor have not grown richer at all in the last 2 decades, even while the country as a whole has grown. The sources of the problem are very complex, like the graph. Basically, in places where inequality is highest, growth doesn't help. Why? The World Bank's team simulations show that increasing the ability of people to move socially from one sector to a better one has a huge impact on the reduction of inequality. On the left, where is an area on the chart, is countries where social mobility hurts. On the right, there is more mobility and better income distribution. So basically, social matters count. Poverty will get worse, continue to be a problem where there is no social mobility. And that's a big problem because income growth is associated with higher skills and education. This graph shows the ratio of wages of skilled to unskilled workers. On the right, again, is Africa, 6 or 7 to 1, skilled to unskilled. So we see progress in countries where there is mobility. And as wages rise in China, for example, the benefits of globalization begin to spread, for example, to Mexico. But where there is no mobility, there are problems. Where gaps in income across nations remain, one result is migration from poor to rich countries with very difficult political consequences.
There's been a lot of discussion, study, academic literature on the flow of financial services, on the flow of goods around the world. I think there has been less studies on the migration of people and labor forces and how that is beginning to take place in the world and how to make it more efficient. Obviously, countries will be sensitive about migratory flows and immigration that will affect, I guess, their countries, but there must be ways of addressing this in productive ways, progressive ways, that will enable people to move in and out of countries, fulfill and fill in a service gap, but at the same time not be a threat to those existing populations.
Well, I think first of all, that's a continental European problem. And we have this huge state debt. So, I mean, a lot of our budget is really being misused to pay back interest on this debt instead of investing it into education and things that look forward rather than, you know, paying off in the past. We've seen that, you know, with missing integration. I mean, we have this huge migration on top of that. Yeah. So we see disintegration in large markets like France. We see that in Italy. We see this huge pressure of Africans, you know, who just want to make it, and they're coming in boats, ships, on planks, just to get a sort of chance to participate. And so education is, I think, one of the most important things that really governments should drive, but won't drive because they're dealing with the legacies of the past rather than, you know, investing in the future. So this is clearly, I think, where companies can kick in.
We heard this same idea, governments moving too slowly, not moving, in other meetings, for example, in Latin America.
Most Latin countries have inequality as one of the critical issues that is threatening the democracy in the region. Inequality is only surpassed by good education and good works, and therefore good employment. Thus, the private sector has a very important role to play in dealing with inequality by basically supporting good government policy in the economic field that will result in generation of employment, basically training, on-the-job training, which will result in middle classes, which is the support of a modern society.
The bottom line, however, is that with all the progress we can anticipate, there will be a vast pool of unskilled labor sitting in less developed countries. A tsunami. That is where almost all the growth in unskilled workers will be. Of 4.1 billion workers, it's estimated that 3.5 billion will be unskilled. And 3.3 billion will be in the developing countries. Now, in addition to income inequality, the business leaders we interviewed spoke of other challenges. It's a long list.
There's been a big development of the financial world, which obviously is benefiting the capitalistic system, but is also developing in its own ways, in ways which are not necessarily consistent with what society considers to be good. You know, there's a lot of discussion about private equity, hedge funds. Private equity in many instances are playing a useful role, but they are shortening the horizon of companies. So how do we make it consistent that we can have this flow of capital going to private equity and that we still have a kind of a long-term development of the economy with innovation, research, etc. China, Russia may develop in different ways. They may adapt to the market capitalism as we know it. But they may also develop a much more control, state capitalism, and then the interaction of this state capitalism and our market capitalism is very important, and we are not prepared. We, being the Western world or the industrialized countries, we are not prepared to deal with that.
For me, the first and important thing is that I believe in the fundamentals of capitalism. I agree that it's a good model. One of the challenges of the capitalism is how to include more people and make the poor people more involved in a productive society. I think the best way to business to contribute with this problem is to have the business people thinking in a sustainable way. When I say sustainable, I'm not talking only about the environment. I'm really talking about the three P's, that is people, planet, and profit. So business until now, it's almost always about profit. And now we have to include the unlimited resources that come from the environment. We have to not only take care of it, but consider it as a limited resources and try new ways of gain efficiency in terms of these resources. And also people, always thinking about how my business is going to impact the people that work for me, the people that consume my goods, and all the people that are linked with my business. I also think that is another threat for the capitalism nowadays. The threat is the protectionism wave that we have in countries, not only talking about US, but also talking about Europe. And I think it's very important to see it as a threat for capitalism, to face this brutal fact, and also to open this discussion with not only among governments, but also with business people and all the other entities that can contribute with this.
My country, I came from Taiwan, and particularly it's a good example of that. Over the last several decades, we've grown tremendously under the free capital market system. But of course, we are seeing a lot of threats, including environment and impendix, which are all being discussed today in the forum. But but these are more natural effects. But I'm personally more concerned with the human aspects of the conflicts that may come along in the future and that could impede the healthy growth of market capitalism. Protectionism, conflicts among nations in East Asia, that's still a concern. From North Korea on to Taiwan Straits and then to India-Pakistan border, all this are flaring points which may, if anything serious happens, that can impede the flow of trade and flow of business.
It's quite a list. An unstable financial system, they picked that up, you noticed. State capitalism, protectionism, war. It's unsettling. When we asked about the role that business could or should play, we were struck by the very wide differences in the perspective that we heard. The next speaker and the panel following will address some of these questions, and we'll also pick them up in the afternoon. But this is what our business leader panels had to say.
What I fear is that large companies will continue to take a very short-term perspective and see how much they can get in quarterly returns, and fail to see that they are operating in markets where people are very frustrated that they are not getting a piece of the action. And unless they start feeling in places like Mexico or India or the US that they are able to share in the benefits of global capitalism, global capitalism will become increasingly threatened. You will get populist governments of the Chavez type in Venezuela, coming into Mexico, coming into Colombia, and the poor people of India voted out the last government because they ran on India shining, and only 10% of the population of India saw the high-tech boom. All of the poor people in urban and rural areas were saying, I don't see anything shining.
As we try to rationalize our operations, rationalize our investments in the various countries, we work with those regions, the cities or the counties or the states or the local governments and then the national governments to have a long-term plan of what we're going to do as we say, if this type of production is no longer competitive being manufactured, what else can we do?
I think that the biggest issue we have is that government seems to see business as the arch enemy. I think that there's no realization yet, or not enough anyway, that really we're in this together and that a lot of the solutions can become about by working jointly. I think a lot of times people see things in a binary way. They see what's good for business as being bad for employees. What's good for business is being bad perhaps for the environment. And I think there's a certain underlying mistrust that we need to somehow do away with.
I think companies are at the forefront of this struggle because they're the people. First of all, the big companies are exceedingly global. And secondly, they therefore have to make people work together in a constructive way based on an understanding of what happens elsewhere and different attitudes and so on that people bring to jobs and bring to business and bring to the assumptions of their whole behavior. It's companies which over and over and over again at the front line pragmatically have to deal with very profound problems.
I would say that Argentina's main challenge is institutional. I think we collectively, government and people, have managed to destroy trust in institutions. And I think the restoration of a rule of law and the enforcement of the rule of law is absolutely critical for business, governments, growth, reduction of poverty, the future of capitalism. That's where it lies, in restoring confidence in institutions.
Let me just name a few of the threats that I think are serious threats to market capitalism. Number one is politicians because politicians create the rules that we all have to live by, and the politicians responding to voters can create rules that could be very, very damaging to our form of capitalism here in the United States.
I submit that today's multilateral institutions, which has been set up some 50 or more years ago, is really set up for a totally different world versus the one that we have today. The way I would actually start thinking about that would be to think about developing a few scenarios that would actually think how the world would evolve, okay, if we did it business as usual. And then to think about where we need to really rethink the whole corporate governance on a multilateral basis, and what institutions and then what rules would be necessary.
I believe what we need is a development of international governance to handle those issues. We know that trade investment issues, climate change issues, terrorism issues, financial crime issues are issues which cannot be handled at the national level. They can only be handled at the international level. And we don't have a framework. We don't have an international governance framework which can handle that. So unless we develop this international framework, we have a risk that there'll be backlash against the very concept of capitalism itself.
Okay, what did you hear? Business leaders are concerned that the management of firms, management of countries, and of international institutions are not going to deal well with the challenges posed by income inequality, migration, protectionism, and the environment. They are worried that their governments will respond in ways that will slow economic growth, rather than provide the education and other services that will integrate low-income populations into our system. They're worried that they will not deal with the environment and they will not build the international institutions needed to set rules and facilitate trade. We heard that just on energy policy in the United States, that we can't even get a tax on fuel. These are challenges that we hope speakers will address in the next session, and that we will pick up in our panels this afternoon. When we asked our panels of business leaders what they thought Harvard Business School might contribute to the resolution of these issues, we heard three kinds of answers. One was evident in Nancy Barry's remarks in the video. Many of these challenges are opportunities for entrepreneurs in disguise, but they need to be embraced in ways that may require adding new skills to the toolkit. More than ever, Harvard Business School should develop entrepreneurial leaders who can build companies that can include the poorer populations. A second piece of advice was picked up in the words of Hank Schack, Chris Hogg, and Michael Diekman. Leaders of today's global companies, more than any other group, are constantly dealing with managing diversity, complexity, and scale. Those skills are desperately needed as we work to resolve some of the problems we face, either in the councils of government or in cross-national institutions that deal with our agenda. Finally, a significant number of the business leaders, represented by Victor Fung in the videos I showed, thought that Harvard Business School should help lead the business community by producing better scenarios, better studies, cases, and by convening business-government groups from time to time that could work on these questions, away from the headlines and away from celebrity events like Davos. The faculty, when we talked with them, concluded that Harvard Business School should devote more resources to understanding and teaching about the work involved in dealing with this agenda. But the faculty team sees a big challenge ahead. We're discussing complex objectives, not formulating, maximizing shareholder value. The role of general managers in private organizations is clear. Their authority within their organization is well defined, and their activities in the market are legitimate. When leaders begin to deal with system-level problems, their authority is far from clear, and their legitimacy will often be attacked. I think you could see how happy people in the previous panel were with their interface with government. If Harvard Business School is going to consider carefully the public consequences of private action, viewed from the level of national or international systems, it's going to take new understanding, new skills, and an appropriate set of values. It's a huge challenge for us. It remains to see whether these can be developed. Which brings me to the conclusion of our presentation. What do you think? You are our alumni and our constituency, our most important constituency. We learned a lot from talking with just a few of you over the past couple of years. But we look forward to hearing much more from you in the years ahead. Thank you very much.